Crime and homelessness growing in our cities, and liberals do nothing. President Biden can't solve these problems or won't. And if we nominate a lawless, selfish, failed politician like Donald Trump, who lost the House, the Senate, and the White House, we all know Joe Biden will win again.
Former Republican Congressman Will Hurd of Texas announced his candidacy for presidency today, presenting himself as an alternative to the ex-president, who Hurd says would lose. Hurd is just the latest Republican to announce after Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, did you catch that one? Declared he was running in a video that showed him literally running last week. Get it? And with Florida Senator Rick Scott reportedly threatening to also join the fray, there's already a lot of people running, 12 announced so far, which is one fewer than the number of Republicans who'd entered the race by this date in 2015, a number that eventually grew to 17. But this time, with the ex-president holding a consistently strong lead in the polls, the question is why? Why is the field getting so big? Why are so many Republicans jumping into the race? Tim Miller served as communications director for the Jeb Bush 2016 presidential campaign, as well as spokesman for the RNC. David Plouffe was the campaign manager for Barack Obama in 2008, served as senior advisor to President Obama, and both join me now. So, Tim, let me start with you. You were there the last time. So last time you had Obama's term limited out, right? So you're not going to have an incumbent president take on. That always, I think, invites a lot of challengers. And there was no, like, massive, formidable behemoth in the world of, on the right. There was Jeb Bush was sort of the early favorite, and there was a lot of reasons people thought that. But nothing like Trump. Like, why are so many people getting in this time around?
Yeah, I mean, Jeb hadn't been in office for a decade when he started running, so he was not like that formidable. I was looking at a number of candidates. I like Jeb the best, but I was assessing the field as wide open as an operative, trying to decide who to work for. So that is very much not the case this time. So I think we have two things happening in this election. One is you have a group of people that fit in the grifter slash, maybe if things work out, I can, be in the Trump administration category. That's right. The Vivek Ramaswamys of the world. The mayor, Suarez from Miami, I think fits that bill. And then I think you have a really large and kind of dangerous category of people that are delusional. And I think that is Mike Pence and Nikki Haley. And
Wait a second. A politician who's delusional about their own chances?
Yeah, I know.
And their own appeal?
Narcissistic and delusional. I know this is going to be hard to believe, Chris. Watch out. But, this is Scott, Haley, Pence, Hurd, right? And I really think that, my understanding is, from talking to people around them, is that they are, in a bubble of this small minority of Republicans who agree with them. Those are the people they socialize with. Right. Those are the donors that they're dealing with. They think they deeply want and are wishing the Republican Party would go back to a candidate like them. And I think they're hopeful that either Donald Trump will, have a heart attack or end up in prison, and things might fall in their lap, or that there's going to be some magic fairy that makes the Republican Party go back to what it was in 1999. And that's just not going to happen. But I think that delusion is motivating a lot of these guys.
Well, so it's the first one, right, that he has a heart attack or he ends up, in prison, that I think, David, you have to explain this contradiction, right, which is that he is obviously the front runner. He's polling like the front runner. No one will attack him, right? Almost no one. I mean, Christie being an exception. They're all very gentle. And yet when you look at people like voting with their feet, people seem to think they have a shot, right? So there's some way you got to explain why those two things are together. What's your explanation?
Well, I agree with Tim. I mean, some are in it for their future. Some are in it because they're crazy. I mean, listen, the political graveyard is filled with people whose supporters and friends told them what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to hear, until the voters ultimately were clear on that point. But I do think what you have, though, is, Trump's not at 60, 65, right? There are enough Republicans out there open to an alternative. And when you see some of the focus groups that have been reported on, the qualitative discussion I find even more interesting than the polling, which is clearly there's an opening. Now, what's fascinating about this is, listen, there's 20 lifetimes between now and the Iowa caucuses. But once we get there, let's just remember, one of the reasons Trump won back in 2016 is, Kasich stayed in, Cruz stayed in, Rubio stayed in. And so, listen, if Klobuchar and Buttigieg had waited 48 hours to drop out, Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee. So a lot of this, will come down to after Iowa, maybe after New Hampshire,
Right.
Does this go down to one Trump alternative? But if a bunch of these knuckleheads stay in and split up that vote, that's where his 40% looks more formidable. But I think what the people who are serious about this, and I agree with Tim, it's not many, but the people who are serious about it, they're right about it. There's an opening here. Even if Trump doesn't self-immolate even more, there's clearly, if you can piece this together, there's enough Republican primary voters out there open to someone else. Now, the fact that they're open to someone else and closing the sale, of course, are two very, very distinct things.
Yeah, and we should say the Emerson polling between April and June shows a little bit of movement in the right direction, right? If you're someone who is a Republican who doesn't want Trump to be the nominee, it goes from 69 to 59. DeSantis picks up a few points. There's some other reasons. This is about whether a third-party candidate would sort of spoil that. This is a sort of April to June comparison. But, so there's reason to think there's an opening here. I completely agree. And I do think, Tim, there is this strange waiting for the meteor feeling to the whole field, right? Which is just look, people like him. You kind of alienate all the people you're trying to persuade if you criticize him, because then you're a lib. But I don't know, maybe when we get to the fifth indictment, or he's actually sitting in a courtroom, people, that really is what it feels like to me.
Well, they've been kind of waiting for meteor for 8 years, those of them that didn't jump like me, Chris. So it's kind of eventually I'm going to be right, eventually everybody dies, right? So I think that at this point, they're pot committed, so there's that element to it. Here's the thing, though, and I agree with David in general that there's an opening for somebody, but the types of Republicans in these focus groups that we do with the Bulwark that are open to someone else want someone like Trump. They like Trump. So there isn't an opening for a lot of the people that have gotten in. I think that's the important thing to understand. Just the one poll I saw that was relevant, in a head-to-head, DeSantis is at 33, Tim Scott is at 23. And I think that gap tells you a lot, right? If you're a Tim Scott, you've got a really long way to go. And I don't see the opening for people like that.
Yeah. Quickly, David, on Trump. This is the last thing here is DeSantis, right? Who has modeled himself as if you like Trump, how about me? But I'm younger and I can win. I also think it speaks to perceptions of his weakness that you're seeing all these people get in.
Well, no question. And that is maybe it's not fatal. We'll see. But certainly it's a critical error, which is that he has now created oxygen for a bunch of people, because I still think on paper he is by far the most likely person that Trump's going to get dethroned to do it. But he's been close to god awful to date. But it's not even July 4th. Okay. There is so much time left. We've got debates. We've got putting together. He does seem to be putting together something, a decent candidate in Iowa. We'll see. So I think you're right. And all these candidates getting in, DeSantis has to look in the mirror and say the reason this field is getting more crowded, the reason we're probably going to have debates now over 2 nights, is because I have, been awful.
Just saying that sentence gave me a little flash of PTSD. Tim Miller and David Plouffe, thank you very much.